Have you heard of Frog Hollow? Sure you have. It's on the news fairly regularly. We talk about it on Eyewitness News sometimes. But what do you know about it? Probably nothing. With us here today to talk about this is author, columnist, and occasional Faces Day guest Susan Campbell. She's the author of this new book, Frog Hollow, Stories from an American Neighborhood. And Susan, thanks for being with us here in the program.
Thank you for having me.
And the big question that most people ask, and I often wonder about because I don't know the real answer to this, how did it get its name?
Frogs. It was literally
frogs.
It was amphibians. It was not French Canadians, as some people think. It's a very marshy area, and there was a huge marsh right off of Broad Street. Frogs.
And it's not far from downtown. What do we know about
Not at all.
when it was settled?
It was farmland in the very beginning, and then industry came in the 1850s, and that's when it was really settled. That's when the streets were paved and the perfect sixes went up.
What kind of industry we're talking about?
Everything, starting with Sharp's rifles, weed sewing machines, which for a while rivaled Singer, except Singer had better patent lawyers. Pope bicycles, Pope cars, electric cars, way before their time.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So electric cars were made in Frog Hollow?
Yeah, they were.
I know some were built later at the Arch Street Tavern, that building that was one of their annexes or something like that.
Yeah.
What kind of population first settled that area, do we know?
Not really. Mostly the industry brought people, so it was drips and drabs. But as with the Silicon Valley and California, the technology, the really genius technology people brought others in. So that really, between the 1860s and 1910, that's when most people came.
Is any of that industry still there?
No, not really. The buildings are still there, and they're often being used as housing or something else, but no, the industry has mostly moved out, first to the suburbs and then beyond.
So the big employers there would be the small little restaurants and bodegas, and Hartford Hospital's also in Frog Hollow.
It is, yeah.
You're right on the edge there. What did you learn about this neighborhood that you did not know?
Everything. I thought I knew the neighborhood because I used to go for walks through there when I worked full-time at the Current. But the more research I did, the more I realized that this is like a petri dish for everything in this country. It's the place where people came to start their American dream. It was wave after wave of immigrants from everywhere, came for the jobs. Some of them bounced out to the suburbs, some of them stayed. It's just a fascinating place that I would walk through or drive through, but had no idea.
And it still is.
Yeah, it really is.
You still have immigrants moving there, and
very much, and it's still a vibrant, lively neighborhood.
What is the most surprising thing you learned about that neighborhood?
I think just the depth, the little stories, the rest of the title is Frog Hollow, Stories from an American Neighborhood. And
for people who grew up there.
For people who grew up there, exactly. And it was the little stories of people who passed through the speakeasies that lined Laurel Street. It was a rough and tumble place from the get-go. Really interesting place, but it was the human factor, all these people I kept meeting in my research that I loved.
And Frog Hollow sort of covers a wide swath of land in Hartford. Up on that hill there, there's the cemetery. Trinity College is essentially in Frog Hollow.
Basically, it's the northern boundary of Trinity to Washington, to the far reaches of Pope Park, and then Capitol. So it's significant size.
You know, there are some folks who live there who have told me that they fear maybe gentrification one of these days because it's so close to downtown. The architecture is amazing. Some of these old buildings, the perfect sixes you talk about, which we don't see those perfect sixes outside of Hartford, really. Not
really, and that's a valid concern because the neighborhood is now very popular with Gen X and millennials because the rents are low enough. Rents are still very expensive in Connecticut, but the rents are low enough in Frog Hollow, and you get that city feel and vibe that people are moving in. But so far, the people who've moved in have tried to be respectful as far as development and that sort of thing to retain the spirit of the place.
Without giving away the book, tell us just a brief synopsis of one of the stories that you learned from somebody there.
One of my favorite stories had to do with Dolly Babcock. She was the wife of Elisha Babcock. Elisha ran the American Mercury, which was one of the early post-colonial newspapers and had far influence. And while he ran the newspaper, she ran the farm. And she was a really wonderful businesswoman.
And there's a Babcock Street.
There's a Babcock Street.
Is that named for them, do we know?
Yeah, it is.
You know, in terms of, like, were there any famous people who came out of Frog Hollow over the years that you know of? I know Hartford's most famous is Samuel Clemens.
Right.
Mark Twain.
Katharine Hepburn. No one on that level, but there were just an incredible amount of people who, maybe they're not big, bold-faced names, but they went out and did something with themselves. So maybe not on Katharine Hepburn's level, but yeah.
But other people who certainly made a contribution to Connecticut society and industry.
Big time, yes.
And in terms of if somebody walks through it today, what should they be looking for in terms of an old historic landmark?
You can look for the Perfect Sixes, which were awesome.
They're everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. Go down to Billings and Spencer, go down to the Lyceum on the right. That was built by the Archdiocese to try to give the Irish children somewhere to go, and that's still there.
The book is Frog Hollow, Stories from an American Neighborhood. Susan Campbell, always a pleasure to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.